My husband, who's paralyzed from the waist down and I've supported through it all, said he wants a divorce. At a party, he told a guest, she's just the staff. My niece asked, why do you let them talk to you like that? 3 years later, he begged me to come back. Selena, pass me the remote. It wasn't a request. It was the tone he used with the aides who came during the day. I picked it up and handed it to Jared, who didn't even look up. Not a thank you. Not even a nod. And that, right there, was my life for 5 years. Jared wasn't always like that. Or maybe he was, and I just never noticed. I think love does that to you. Blurs the lines. Masks the small red flags behind romantic gestures and clever wit. When we first met, back in 2008, he made me laugh more than anyone ever had. We met at a local tech mixer in Charleston. I was helping coordinate the venue for a client, and he was the keynote speaker. A software engineer with big ambitions, painfully smart, charming without trying. I was drawn in by how fast he could think, how quick he was on his feet. Fast forward 8 years, we were married, no kids, by choice. We both wanted careers and freedom. Or at least we used to. Jared was always traveling for work, pitching startups, networking across cities. I stayed in Charleston working in real estate logistics and keeping our home together. It worked for us. Then the accident happened. It was a rainy Thursday night. He was driving back from Atlanta after a pitch meeting and a semi ran a red light. I'll never forget the sound of the knock at the door at 2 a.m., the police telling me my husband was alive but not okay. I remember the sterile scent of the hospital, the look on his face when he realized he couldn't move his legs. I remember the nurse pulling me aside and gently saying, he's going to need full-time care when he's released. Without hesitation, I quit my job. I thought, of course. He would have done it for me. At first, it felt like the right thing. I took it all on, doctor's appointments, physical therapy, learning how to catheterize, helping him bathe, dress, cook, clean. I handled the insurance calls, managed our finances, learned how to transfer him into and out of his chair. I was exhausted, but I was committed. The first few months post-accident were quiet. Jared rarely spoke. He'd stare out the window or get frustrated when his body didn't cooperate. I tried to stay upbeat. I decorated the house with soft lighting. Made his favorite meals. Read to him at night. But the man I knew began to shift into someone else, someone angry. It started small. He would get irritated if I didn't respond immediately when he called my name. Then he began snapping at me over how I folded his clothes. Then he started comparing me to the nurses at the rehab center. They're professionals, Selena. They know what they're doing. I brushed it off. He's grieving. He's in pain. Be patient. But patience doesn't make you bulletproof. I stopped going out. Friends stopped calling. My world shrank down to our one-story home and his needs. I began losing pieces of myself I didn't realize I had to give up. And worst of all, he didn't seem to see me anymore. Not as a partner. Not as a woman. Just someone whose job was to be there. He started inviting Caleb over a lot, his business partner. They'd sit in the living room, and I'd bring them drinks and snacks, unnoticed like the help. One day, I overheard Caleb ask Jared, "How's she holding up?" Jared laughed. "She's built for this. She's always been domestic." That word. Domestic. Like I was a vacuum or a microwave. I swallowed my pride. Again. But the party was when it broke. It was Caleb's 40th birthday. A swanky backyard cookout in Mount Pleasant. Jared insisted on going, so I made sure the van was booked. He was groomed and dressed sharp, his wheelchair polished. I even wore a new sundress, hoping I'd feel like something more than just a shadow in his life. It was hot and loud. I wheeled him around, made him plates of food, introduced him to people when necessary. No one really paid me attention. That was normal by then. But then it happened. He was talking to some woman, someone I didn't know, and she looked at me and asked, "Oh, is that your wife?" Without hesitation, he smirked and said, "She's just the staff." It wasn't said in malice. Just matter of fact. I stood there. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. I just excused myself and went into Caleb's guest bathroom and stared at my own face. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Tired. Washed out. Empty. That night, my niece Ari, who had come with me because she loved Jared and wanted to support us, asked me in the car, "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" I had no answer. 2 weeks later, he asked for a divorce. Said he needed someone who could challenge him intellectually and that I had become too focused on caregiving. I felt a strange stillness. I just said, "Okay." There was no fight. No begging. I moved out 2 months later. No alimony, no battle for property. I didn't want anything from him. I just wanted peace. I rented a small condo off Coleman Boulevard, not far from Shem Creek. I got a part-time job at a boutique real estate firm. Ari moved in with me later that year, after issues with her mom escalated. I think she also didn't want me to be alone. People always ask if I missed him. Not really. I missed who he used to be. But I didn't miss the version of him that came after. The first year alone was hard. I was tired all the time. I'd catch myself cutting food into small bites like I used to do for him. I'd feel phantom guilt when I slept in. But then small joys came back. Sunday morning coffee on the porch. Picking out my own groceries. Music. Long walks with no purpose. Freedom. Ari and I built new routines. Movie nights, IKEA furniture disasters, cooking attempts that always ended in takeout. I remembered how to laugh again. Then, 3 years later, he came back. It started with an email. Just a subject line, "Hope you're okay." Then a string of messages. Then a voicemail. Then Caleb reached out to say Jared wasn't doing well. Mental health stuff. He'd gone through several caregivers, most of them quitting. He was isolated. Angry. Not coping. I didn't respond. Until one afternoon, I walked out of work and saw him waiting in the parking lot in an accessible van. He looked older. Thinner. Unshaven. "I just wanted to see you," he said. I stood in front of the van. I didn't get in. He said, "I made a mistake. You were everything. I just didn't see it." I was quiet. Then I said, "You didn't want a wife. You wanted staff." His face crumpled. "I didn't mean that, you did," I said. "And now I mean this, I'm not coming back." I walked away. And for the first time in years, my steps felt light. I didn't look back as I left him sitting there in the van. He didn't try to follow me. I think, maybe for the first time, he understood something deeper than just being told no. Maybe he finally realized what it feels like to be dismissed. But I didn't feel triumphant. There wasn't some dramatic music playing in my head. There was just this strange calm, like finishing a hard, slow breath. And then the guilt creeped in, not for him, but for the version of me that waited years for that moment. For the woman who begged the universe to give her back the man she married. I pitied her, a little. The messages didn't stop, not right away. Jared sent long emails, some angry, some emotional. One said, "You never even fought for us." That one made me laugh a little. I had fought every day for 5 years while he watched and shrugged. Eventually, I blocked him. But he found ways. Once, he sent a letter through Ari. Gave it to her boyfriend at a campus bookstore, said it was important. I didn't read it. Ari shredded it on her own. "You already wrote the last chapter," she said. Life moved forward. I poured myself into work. The housing market was chaotic, but staging became something I loved again. There was something healing about arranging a space to look beautiful and whole, even if it was only temporary. It gave me control over something. Order. One afternoon I was staging a home on Sullivan's Island when a client asked me if I'd ever considered writing a book. "You have that calm teacher energy," she said. I laughed. A year earlier, I was yelling into pillows at midnight. But something about that stuck with me. Around that same time, I joined a small women's community group in Charleston, a mix of older professionals, some retired, some divorced, some widowed. They held meetups at local coffee shops and beach cleanup events. I didn't expect to talk much, but the first time I shared a piece of my story, there were nods. No shock, no gasps. Just understanding. One woman hugged me after and whispered, "I was someone's staff too." It helped. It made it feel less like a sad personal failure and more like something that happens to too many women in silence. Ari thrived. She started an internship with a local nonprofit and spent her nights journaling and doing weird Pinterest crafts in the living room. She was the heartbeat of our home. Always checking on me in small ways. "Did you eat?" or "How did it go at work?" As if our roles had quietly swapped and I was the one being cared for now. And then came Ronan. I met him at a bookstore downtown, of all places. I was browsing old cookbooks, something I did sometimes even though I rarely followed a recipe, and he made a joke about a 1950s Jell-O salad photo. I laughed too loud, probably. He smiled. He was a retired photographer, a widower. He had quiet eyes and didn't fill silence with noise. Our conversation started slow: books, travel, photography, dogs. Nothing too personal. I told him I was divorced. He didn't ask for details. We had coffee. Then lunch. Then months passed and I realized I looked forward to seeing him more than I had anyone in years. He never tried to fix me. Never offered advice. Just listened. One rainy afternoon, I found myself telling him about Jared. Not the full story, just the contours. The caregiving. The insult. The divorce. The van. Ronan didn't say much. Just gently put his hand over mine and said, "That must have been lonely." That's when I cried for the first time in years. Not from pain, but from being seen. But here's the thing. Even with Ronan, even with Ari doing great and work going well and friends slowly finding me again, I still struggled. Not with regret, but with shame. Shame that I had stayed so long. Shame that I needed permission, from my niece, of all people, to admit I was being treated like less. Shame that it took being discarded to finally walk away. But healing isn't always graceful. Sometimes it looks like saying no 100 times before you mean it. Sometimes it's waking up in the middle of the night and realizing you don't miss the person, you miss having a reason to feel needed. And sometimes it's just sitting with yourself in silence and finally not hating the stillness. I still get reminders. Jared's name shows up sometimes in LinkedIn notifications. He hasn't updated his profile in years. Every so often, a mutual acquaintance will mention him in passing. I nod politely. I don't feel anger. I don't feel love. I don't feel much of anything. Which, honestly, feels like a miracle. There was one afternoon, maybe 6 months after the parking lot run-in with Jared, where I found myself standing in the cleaning aisle of Harris Teeter, staring blankly at the bleach bottles. I don't even remember why I was there, just that I froze. My hands were trembling, and my chest felt tight, like I was suddenly drowning in the echo of old routines. Bleach. The smell of sterile caregiving. The sound of plastic gloves snapping on. A quiet panic. And then, just like that, I dropped the bottle and left my cart in the middle of the aisle. Drove straight to Shem Creek, parked, and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying not to cry. I didn't even know what I was crying about. Just that something inside me was still healing, and it wasn't linear. It was jagged and frustrating and slow. That's what people don't tell you about leaving someone who damaged you emotionally. You don't just walk away and suddenly feel whole again. Sometimes, it creeps up when you're slicing tomatoes or folding laundry. Sometimes it shows up when you're laughing with friends and a song comes on that he used to play in the background. Healing has no calendar. Later that week, I told Ronan about the bleach aisle. He didn't try to make it better. He just said, "Your body remembers things your heart forgets." That man, he never tries to solve me. He just holds space. And that has been the most healing thing of all. We started spending more time together, but I moved slowly. I had boundaries this time. I didn't cook for him every day. I didn't make myself small to keep the peace. I didn't offer to do his laundry or organize his life. And he never expected me to. He met me as I was, not as someone to be molded. One night, while we were walking downtown near the Battery, he told me that he once tried to fix his late wife's depression. I thought if I just did enough, said enough, worked hard enough, she'd be okay. But people aren't puzzles, Selena. We don't need fixing. We need space to be seen. And maybe that's why we worked. I didn't have to be useful. I could just be. Meanwhile, life with Ari was its own rhythm. She was still in and out of my house between school and internships. She started dating a guy named Milo, sweet, gentle, artistic. They would stay up late working on vision boards or baking cookies at 11 p.m. I let them. The house felt alive. And then one evening, while we were cleaning out the coat closet, she pulled out a box I hadn't seen since I moved in. "Do you want this?" she asked, holding up a photo album. It was old. Dusty. Full of wedding photos, vacation shots, and a few scattered hospital images of Jared from the early rehab days. I sat down on the floor with it in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just flipped through slowly, page by page, watching my former life pass like an old movie. There was one photo, Jared smiling, arms around my shoulders, before the accident. I was laughing. My eyes were soft. That version of me looked so hopeful. "I used to love this person," I whispered. Ari sat beside me. "Both of you?" I looked at her. That girl, sharp as glass when she wants to be. "No," I said. "Just me." We burned the album in the fire pit that weekend. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was just quiet, necessary closure. That same month, a woman from the Charleston Caregivers Support Group reached out. She was starting a mentorship program for people transitioning out of long-term caregiving, and she asked if I'd speak at a meeting. I almost said no. But then I thought of the bleach aisle. The unspoken shame. The silence. So I said yes. When I stood in that church basement, in front of 20 women and a few men, I told them everything. Not every detail, but the heart of it. The erosion. The loneliness. The van. And when I said, "He once introduced me to someone as just the staff," half the room gasped. The other half just nodded. Like they'd heard it too, in their own way. Afterward, a woman named Jolene came up to me, teary-eyed. "I took care of my husband for 8 years. He died last spring." I'm ashamed to say I felt relief. I took her hand. "That's not shame. That's truth. And you don't have to carry it alone." The mentorship work gave me purpose again. I wasn't trying to fix people. Just hold space. Just like Ronan did for me. Somewhere in the middle of all this, grocery store flashbacks, bonfire photo burns, community meetings, I started dreaming again. Not the wishful kind, but actual dreams while sleeping. Sometimes I'd wake up and remember colors. Or laughter. Or dancing. One night, I dreamed I was in a sunlit kitchen, barefoot, cooking with someone faceless. Just music and light and peace. I woke up and smiled. Not because it was real, but because I wasn't dreaming of wheelchairs anymore. Or silence. Or slamming doors. Even my subconscious was starting to believe I was free. The last time I saw Jared was at a community fundraiser. I hadn't known he'd be there. He was with Caleb, seated near the back of the hall. I saw him before he saw me. My stomach dropped, but I didn't walk away. I was wearing a navy dress, my hair down, no makeup except a little lipstick. I looked, okay. More than okay, maybe. I looked like someone who got out. When he noticed me, his eyes went wide. Shock, maybe. Or something else, grief, possibly. Not for me, but for what he couldn't undo. He nodded. I nodded back. That was it. I didn't go over. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was just done. After that silent nod at the fundraiser, I didn't see Jared again. Not in person, anyway. But that moment stuck with me. The way he looked at me, like someone staring at a closed door they finally realized they locked themselves out of. He was no longer the man from the cookout. Or even the man from the van. He looked small. Hollowed out. And for the first time I didn't feel pity. I felt release. It's a strange thing to admit, but there's something heavy about carrying around the need to be understood by someone who never cared to try. I had clung to that hope for years, even long after I left. Maybe he'll get it one day. Maybe he'll finally see what he did. Maybe he'll understand the damage. But standing in that room, fully clothed in my own power, I realized I no longer needed him to get it. I got it. I had gotten myself. The fundraiser ended around 9. Ronan was waiting outside in his truck, holding a to-go box with lemon cake from the dessert table. I slid into the passenger seat, my knees still shaky, not from fear but from the weight of what I'd just shed. He handed me the box. How'd it go? I stared out the window for a second. He was there. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. Okay. That was it. He drove us home. No digging, no interrogating, no emotional cleanup crew. Just quiet, and cake, and jazz humming through the speakers. There are tiny moments like that now, moments that remind me how much life has shifted. Like when I go to sleep without keeping one ear open. Or when I spend an entire weekend without feeling guilty for resting. Or when I make dinner and only have to think about what I want to eat. Freedom isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just soft silence where there used to be dread. That fall, Ari moved into her first apartment in North Charleston. She painted her tiny kitchen yellow and called me every night for the first week to ask how to cook basic things like rice and baked chicken. I didn't mind. In fact, those calls became the sweetest part of my evening routine. We talked a lot more freely now. About everything, her fears about adulthood, my strange adjustment to being emotionally available again, even our memories of the Jared years, as we quietly started calling them. One night, out of nowhere, she said, I used to hate how he talked to you. But I didn't know how to say it back then. You were 17, I said. You shouldn't have had to say anything. Still, she replied, it never sat right with me. It meant more than I could put into words. Knowing that she saw it too. That I wasn't crazy. That it wasn't just in my head. There's something incredibly healing about being validated by someone who was there, someone who witnessed it firsthand and still stood by you after. In January, I was invited to speak again, this time at a regional caregivers summit. Bigger crowd, more formal, but same message. I almost turned it down, worried I didn't have anything new to say. But I went. This time, I wore a blazer that made me feel invincible and stood in front of a room of strangers and told them about invisible loss. About the kind of grief that comes from watching someone disappear while they're still alive. About the betrayal of loving someone through their worst only for them to discard you like a hotel robe when they're ready to start over. And then I said something I hadn't planned, sometimes we confuse loyalty with self-erasure. We think staying is noble, even when it costs us ourselves. But you don't owe anyone your soul. You don't have to disappear to prove you love them. There was silence. And then someone in the front row clapped. Then more hands joined. A ripple. It wasn't applause like for a performance. It felt like shared breath, relief, maybe recognition. After the talk, a man in his late 60s came up to me. White hair, kind eyes. My daughter went through something similar, he said. Stayed with a man who forgot she was a person. I wish she'd heard this a few years ago. I didn't know what to say. Just nodded. Took his hand in mine. Healing isn't just for the people who went through it. It ripples. It reaches those who watched helplessly, too. I walked out of that building lighter. That spring, Ronan and I took our first weekend trip together, nothing fancy. Just a little beach cabin rental on Edisto Island. We didn't even pack much. A few books, some snacks, a bottle of wine. No itinerary. No schedule. We spent the days barefoot in the sand, reading on the porch, making sandwiches, and listening to the tide roll in. It was the most unremarkable, uneventful trip I'd taken in years, and it felt like heaven. One night, while watching the stars, he said quietly, "You know, I think peace is just being with someone who doesn't make you brace for the worst all the time." I turned to look at him. "I haven't flinched in months," I said. He kissed my forehead. I didn't think about Jared once that night. Not even in passing. I didn't compare. I didn't fear. I didn't shrink. I just existed. Safe. Seen. Loved. The story isn't over, but that was the moment I knew I'd finally stepped into the part of my life I was always meant to have. By late summer, life had settled into a rhythm I never thought I'd get back to, one that wasn't dictated by another person's needs, moods, or limitations. My days were mine again. Not borrowed, not scheduled around transfers, meds, or tension. In the mornings, I'd go for walks, just long, quiet strolls down the harbor or through the shaded paths of Hampton Park. I never used to do that. I never had time. Or rather, I didn't take it. It's funny how we convince ourselves that our needs are always secondary when we're in survival mode. That just getting through the day is an accomplishment. Now, walking in the early hours with no destination, no deadline, no one waiting on me, those became sacred. Some mornings I listened to music. Sometimes a podcast. But most of the time, I just walked in silence, letting the breeze and the birdsong stitch back the frayed parts of my soul. There was one morning, early September, when I found myself at the marina watching the boats go out. A woman beside me, mid-60s maybe, short white curls and a sun hat, was painting the waterline in a little travel notebook. We started talking, just small comments about the weather and the light. Eventually, I asked her how long she'd been painting. She smiled. "Since my husband passed." I needed something to make mornings feel new again. I understood immediately. Loss isn't always a person dying. Sometimes it's walking away from someone you loved. Sometimes it's the death of who you used to be. And sometimes it's both at the same time. We talked for a while. Her name was Marianne. She asked what I did, and when I told her about the staging business and the speaking events, she nodded like she already knew me. I asked what she did before painting. She paused. "I was an enabler," she said. "Full-time." And then she laughed, gently, without bitterness. That laughter stuck with me. It reminded me of the kind of woman I was becoming. Someone who could name the pain without living inside of it. Someone who could look back and not feel trapped in the remembering. Later that month, I hosted dinner at my house. Just a few friends, Ronan, and Ari and Milo. I made roasted chicken, poured too much wine, played music from a Bluetooth speaker like I was 20 again. The table was mismatched, chairs borrowed, but it was warm and full of laughter. At one point during the meal, Ari turned to me and said, "You laugh with your whole face now." It hit me harder than I expected. Because I hadn't noticed. I hadn't realized how quiet I'd become during those years. How my laughs had been polite, careful, cautious. How often I'd worried about volume, timing, whether someone else would be annoyed or uncomfortable. Now, I didn't worry. I didn't monitor myself. I didn't shrink. I was loud. I was soft. I was still. I was present. And I was okay. Ronan cleared the plates that night while I sat on the couch, wine glass half full in my hand. I watched him move through the kitchen with ease, no fuss, no performance. He didn't expect praise. He didn't announce his efforts. He just did it, because that's what love looks like when it's healthy. When he sat beside me later, he kissed my cheek and said, "This is the happiest I've seen you." I nodded. Me too. That fall, I turned 49. I didn't throw a party. I didn't post anything dramatic online. But I woke up early, made myself pancakes, and stood in the mirror for a long time looking at my own reflection. There were wrinkles around my mouth from laughing. A few gray strands near my ears. But I looked alive. Not exhausted. Not invisible. Not like just the staff. I looked like Selena. I bought myself flowers that day. Tulips. Yellow. The color of newness. Later that week, I received an email from a woman named Krista. She had attended one of the caregiver talks and wrote that my story made her leave a toxic situation with her ex-husband. She said, "I've read it 3 times. I hope one day I'm as brave as you." I stared at that line for a long time. Not because I believed I was especially brave. But because for so long, I wasn't. For so long, I stayed quiet, stayed small, stayed in pain, because I thought that was love. But love isn't self-erasure. Love doesn't diminish you. Love, when it's real, builds a home in you, not a prison. I replied to Krista that night. Told her she didn't have to be brave all at once. That tiny braveries add up. That every choice to honor herself would eventually create a path forward. And I meant every word. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never left. If I'd stayed with Jared, kept adjusting my needs around his, kept absorbing the emotional bruises because he had physical ones. I wonder if I would have faded completely. But then I look at the life I have now, the laughter, the softness, the way I breathe fully, and I don't have to wonder long. 6 months passed quietly. Life had become, finally, my own. Ari had officially moved out, but she came by every Sunday like clockwork, usually with baked goods or some half-failed Pinterest project. Ronan and I spent weekends alternating between his place and mine. He never pressured me to combine our lives into one house, and I loved him even more for that. Some people need to be merged. I needed to stay whole and choose him freely every time. Then one ordinary Tuesday, my phone buzzed while I was elbow-deep arranging throw pillows in a staged townhome downtown. A text from an unknown number. "Hi Selena. It's Jared. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. But I need your help." I stared at it for a long moment. My fingers hovered above the screen. I didn't feel dread or anger. Just deep, detached curiosity. I deleted it. But not without taking a screenshot. 2 days later, a LinkedIn message came through. "Please. Just 10 minutes. I don't have anyone else. I need your advice on something important. Business related. Not personal. Business." Of course. I sat on that message for a week. Then I replied, "Okay. 10 minutes. At a coffee shop. Public place. That's it." We met the following Tuesday at a cafe in downtown Charleston, neutral territory. I wore a cream blazer and slacks, hair pulled back. Intentional armor. I looked like someone you didn't dismiss. Jared looked tired. Older. Not in years, but in spirit. He had a nurse with him who waited discreetly near the counter. His chair had new scuff marks. His hair was longer, unkempt. The aura of arrogance was gone, replaced by something closer to desperation. He didn't offer a hug. He didn't smile. He looked down as I Saturday, "I don't deserve your time," he started. "You don't," I said calmly. He nodded, accepting it. Then he got to the point. I'm losing the company. Caleb moved on. I tried to launch something new, but I can't handle the logistics with my health declining. I hired 2 people who mismanaged my accounts, and I'm facing serious legal issues. I have no partner. No one who understands the back end. And no reputation left to lean on. And this involves me because you're the only person who ever truly knew how I operated, he said. How I think. What I need. You mean, I used to clean up your messes. Run your calendar. Handle the human side of the business while you played genius, I said. He had the decency to wince. I'm asking if you'd consider helping consult, briefly. Paid, of course. I can't trust anyone else. I let the silence stretch. Then I smiled. You said I was just the staff. He opened his mouth. I didn't mean, you did. And I believed it, I said. 4 years. But you're wrong. I wasn't the staff, Jared. I was the glue. He swallowed hard. I'll help, I said. Under 3 conditions. His eyes flickered up, hopeful. Name them. First, I said, everything goes through email. No calls. No personal meetings. No contact beyond work. Second, I set my rate. You'll pay up front for every consultation hour. No discounts, no exceptions. He nodded slowly. Understood. Third, I said, leaning in slightly, I get full credit for any restructure that works. My name on the documents. My input, acknowledged. He looked hesitant. And if that's a problem, I added, standing up and adjusting my bag, feel free to call one of the nurses you underpaid and disrespected. He shook his head quickly. No. I agree. To everything. I walked away without looking back. Over the next 2 months, I cleaned up the bones of his failed project. Streamlined the back end, restructured 2 departments, helped him recover an investor relationship by rebuilding the pitch deck myself. Every document bore my watermark. Every invoice was paid within 48 hours. I was firm. Polite. Completely uninterested in personal conversation. And when it was time to present the changes to the advisory group he'd managed to scrape back together, I insisted I join the Zoom call. There were 6 men on the call. Jared introduced me as the consultant who saved this ship. I corrected him. I'm Selena. I rebuilt the operations. From scratch. Alone. There was a beat of silence. And then, one of the investors said, you should have been running the company 10 years ago. After the meeting, Jared sent one final email. Thank you. I wouldn't have gotten this back on track without you. I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't undo it. But I hope, in some small way, this helped you reclaim something too. I didn't reply. Because it wasn't about reclaiming anything from him. It was about proving to myself that I had never been just the staff. I had been the engine. The brains. The backbone. I'd been everything. He just hadn't seen it. But now the world did. A few weeks later, I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and poured a glass of wine. Ronan came by, kissed me on the cheek, and asked what I was smiling about. Nothing, I said. Just finally closed an account. He laughed. Big one? I raised my glass. Satisfying one.